just going to go back to the actual Unsplash website, and we'll just look for any image to be used as a background. So I'll just do a forest, and we'll go ahead and right click and copy image address right here. Now going back to our header.ejs partial file, we're going to want to add the following style section under our title. Now we're going to go ahead and preview our application. And we will now see that we do have, while slightly distorted, the background image that I chose for our background. Next, we're going to go back to our app.js file, and we're going to create some new constants to require the request package. So right below our app constant, we're going to create a const request. And then we're going to modify our root route to add a request to the Unsplash API. Similar to Ajax, the request package will allow us to get data from an external site, whereas Ajax works on the client side and request is on the server. So I'm just going to fill that out really quick and make our changes. Okay, now that I'm finished updating our default route, we're good to go ahead and actually test our request URL. Just note that I have just the word access key in here as indicated in the lab document. Make sure to replace this with your actual access key provided by Unsplash. So if you go ahead and enter that into your browser, you should get the JSON response as seen in the document as well. Now we're going to update our header partial file, and we're going to actually change the background image to use the image returned from our API call. To that, we're just going to completely clear out this URL that we have in here. We're just going to enter the image, how it was passed. Now we should be go ahead and run it. And let me just see if my project is still running. And so while it might take a minute, I did get a random image loaded here, and I can go ahead and refresh that and see that I get a completely different image here.
Okay, so now that we are able to pull images from the API, we're now going to set up our search route to be able to input a keyword in the search field and then actually get a image related to that keyword. So what we're actually going to want to do first is you'll probably want to just copy your default route and then make some changes, or you can type it from scratch. Right here I have the search route, and a few differences from our default route is that we have the keyword variable here, where we actually then create our request URL and pass in the keyword as a parameter there, so that the API can return an image that is querying our keyword. Something important to note about these request URLs here, how we're doing it here, these are not just normal quote symbols, these are actually backticks. And that's really important to note, because if you do not use the backtick, you'll actually run into issues and it won't be searching with your keyword. And so that's just an important thing to note, that you are using the backticks. So besides that, most of this is going to be the same to our default route, except that instead of rendering the index page, we're going to be rendering the results page here. And so right now, if you guys tried to run this, you would probably get an error because there is no results page yet. So what you want to come down and do, you'll see that I already have my results page. You'll want to duplicate your index page. And so you would just be duplicating what we have here. This is just your index page, how it should be at this point. And then you'll want to just go ahead and under the closing form, there's going to be 2 lines of code that we're going to be adding to that. So if I go ahead and open up my results page, this here is what we're going to be adding, just a divider, visible divider, just kind of for style, as well as separating obviously the search form up above from our image results. And then we'll actually be returning or just having the image here that will pull the image source from what values were returned and sent over right here. So here we're obviously grabbing the image URL JSON value, and we're setting it as the same name image URL, passing that into our HTML file here, and then obviously setting up the source and displaying it to the user. And then we're just going to set the width and the height to both 200. So with that, if you guys go ahead and go back to your page, and again, it's totally normal for the backgrounds and everything to be loading very slowly. It's something that I ran into multiple times and thought might have been an issue, but as long as you're getting that image to load, then it should be working properly. So if I go ahead and search dog, I should get an image of a dog returned, which that is, and then the background should load in after as that same image. Okay, so now we're going to want to refactor some of our duplicated code. Originally, we had our 2 routes, and both were using this full amount, this pretty much similar, almost identical block of code, with the exception of what was being rendered and I think the parameter being passed into the request URL. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take part of this entire block right here, and we're going to create its own function, the getRandomImage function here. And so pretty much this is going to be borderline identical to what we were dealing with prior, except now we're going to actually be, instead of rendering our page and passing in our image URL, we're actually just going to be returning our image URL, so that then, well, as you'll see next here, where the actual refactored route is, we'll just be using that returned image URL and to actually render the page this way. And so if you get to this point, everything looks good. You have your new function and you have your separate route for search. And if you actually run the page, you'll see that you'll get this, no image will show up, and you'll start getting these image URL undefined messages, which naturally is because we are logging right here what is returned. And the reason for that is because of the way that JavaScript works and how it's asynchronous. And these lines are actually running most likely prior to our line 31 here, because this one is accessing the API, which might take a second to load. And since JavaScript allows code to continue running asynchronously, which means that it can focus on multiple things at once and start running code separately than having to just kind of wait for it to finish, it's going to automatically jump to the console and the render, and it's not going to have an image URL yet because it hasn't got the response from there. And so the way we're going to fix that is through a few things. First, we're going to actually just set our route up here as async. And then we're going to go down to the image URL where we get, where is it, right here, when we're actually calling the function, and we're going to have it await. So this means that it is going to wait for this line of code to actually finish before continuing on. So that will more or less solve our problem. And then there are a few other things we're going to actually have to add to our getRandomImage function. And so we're actually going to use a promise. So we're going to want to fill out and make several changes to our function here, which I'll do now. And then we are also going to want to, inside of this getRandomImage function, we're going to want to change it from just returning the image URL. We're actually going to want to use the resolve keyword. So since we're actually returning a promise, we use resolve. So I'll go ahead and add that. And then if we're wanting to actually send back the error, we'll want to use reject here as well. All right, now we should be good to go back and test our app. So I'm just going to type in a keyword. We're just going to I'll switch it up and do cat. And looks like we are getting a cat image properly. And we'll wait for that background to load. Whoa, there it is. Wow. And then we are going to want to refactor our default route. And to do that, we're also going to be adding the async prior to the actual function. And then since we're not actually passing in a value, we'll just get that image URL from the get random image. We're passing in an empty string so that it just generates a random image for us like it was prior. And then I actually need to update this, but we will render the index page still. And so now if we go back to our page, and I'm going to cut it back so that we just go back to our default route, we will, once it loads, still be getting a random image as we were prior, but now with much more streamlined code without repetition of this get random image function, and it's all in a single place.